It's Christmas time, and Christmas time means it's time for presents, and presents means it's time to make a bunch of stuff. I want to start by talking about this one right here.
First gift, a framing hammerhead pencil topper. The person I'm making this for is a die-hard wood turner, not necessarily framer, but I think I can swing it. Pun intended. I started out by building up a chunk of metal. I used to do this with my hand hammers, and it's definitely possible, as you can tell by this miniature hammer that I forged with only hand tools, link to that video in the description. However, the power hammer makes this process truly fun, instead of just a necessary chore. Once I had my billet, I used my fullering dies to bash in some fullers, and isolate the face of my hammer. Once I had the fullers, I swapped out the top die for a flat die, so that I could forge in the step for the claws of the hammer. You can achieve the same effect by hitting half on, half off the anvil. Once I had my step forged in, I split the single claw into two with the angle grinder, and it's at this point I realized forging hammers have square faces, carpenter's hammers have round faces. So I put both the fullering dies back on and made the fullers cylindrical. Then I put both flat dies on in order to make the face circular. Then I used my chisel to spread the claws apart. And then I did something important that I didn't mention in the short I made about these. You see, when you drill a hole in something organic like this, it's probably not going to be perfectly plumb and straight. So when you're drilling the eyes of these hammers, you make the center punch mark and drill the first hole all the way through from the top of the hammer down. That way, even if your drill meanders off course, the top, which is the part that everyone's going to see, is still perfectly centered. Then you flip it over and drill part of the way through with the larger drill bit. The reason we drill with two sizes is because when you put your pencil in there, the grommet that holds the eraser will catch on that ledge and the eraser will go through. On my miniature rounding hammer, I drilled all the way through and partially through on the same side, so the bottom, that nobody sees, is perfectly centered and the top is way off the mark. But it was worth one scrapped part because it was a very important lesson. From there I hit it with the needle scaler, one of my very favorite tools, gave it the wire wheel, and finished it with boiled linseed oil. I'm really happy how this one turned out, and I think we're going to make a few of these to sell because they really are just so charming. The eye might not be perfectly centered if you look at it from the side, but it is from the top down, and that's the angle that's most important.
You know, my favorite thing to forge is hammers, so it only makes sense that I love forging the miniature hammers, but they're just so cute and so fun. Next present, I want to talk about you.
Present number 2, a miniature steel cowboy hat. Now, credit where credit is due, I got this idea from this 6-year-old video from the channel Shoeless Horse Metalworks. Go check them out if you haven't already. In order to make this cowboy hat, I had to first make some tools. The first one I made was just a chunk of large pipe that I welded onto a piece of square bar and put a generous chamfer on the inside. The square bar on the bottom is so that I can clamp it in my vise. Then, using the power of magic, I welded a ball bearing onto the end of a metal pipe. As for the material, I cut a chunk of 16-gauge sheet steel off, and because I don't have a metal lathe, I use an ancient technique pioneered by generations of Appalachian craftsmen called go after it with an angle grinder until it's the shape you want. And it worked wonderfully. Once I had everything I needed, I started the forming by using the ball bearing on a stick in the center of the cookie of metal to raise a nub that will become the top of our hat. However, because the sheet steel was so thin, it lost all of its heat by the time I sprinted over to the vise, so I dragged the forge over to where I was standing and started going at it. Now this one took a while. It was basically just a back and forth between raising the knob and then flattening out the flange so that it would become a progressively more and more extreme shape. The most economical way to forge this is to turn your heat on your forge way down low. Let it snow, let it snow. Sorry. You turn your forge way down low and let it sit there for about 10 seconds. It has super high surface area but very low volume, so it'll catch every bit of that heat. So this uses the least amount of propane. Now for a slideshow of the next step, because I accidentally left my phone in time-lapse mode. Once I had the center of my hat pulled out, I used a small crossbeam as a top tool for the notches of my hat, and bashed it in with my larger crossbeam. I'm certain there's a proper term for them, but I don't know it. Once I had those, I used a thoroughly dull chisel to bash in the center crease, and it looked fantastic. However, a proper cowboy hat has the edges turned up, so I clamped a pipe in the vise and used that to bend over the rim of my hat. I also tucked the front and back down a bit. With this one, I was afraid that the needle scaler would put a bunch of dents in the thin metal, so I just went straight to finishing it with boiled linseed oil. And this came out 1 billion times better than I thought it would. I don't usually work with sheet steel, however, this went so well that I might start doing it more.
You know, is the hat perfect? No. Is it about 8,000 times better than I thought it would be? Oh, absolutely. It's so adorable and I love it so much. All right, next present, I think we're gonna go right here.
The third present is for a dog named Toast. Well, technically it's for the owner of the dog, which means technically it's for toast. I wanted to make a name tag in the shape of a dog bone, so I started out with a piece of flat bar that I cut very shallow cuts into with an angle grinder, which gave me this weird shape. However, it'll make sense in a moment. I threw my fullering dies on the power hammer and started bashing in the waist of the dog bone? I don't know, the middle part of the dog bone that's thinner than the rest of it. Once I had an aesthetically pleasing shape, I put my bone in the vise and reopened my angle grinder cuts to make the two little nubs that are on cartoon style dog bones. Then I hit it with the needle scaler because, oh man, I love that needle scaler, and used the belt grinder to knock off the harsh corners of the knobs. Then I stamped in Toast's name on the front and the phone number of the owner on the back, which is censored for very obvious reasons. As for attaching the collar, I drilled a hole through the bone extremely carefully, because busting out the side of this would spell a death sentence for the part. But it made it through just fine. Whew. And I made myself a long rivet, the same technique that I used when I was making my drawbridge style soap holder, link to that video in the description. Once my long rivet was through, I curled over the other end so that it could be clipped onto the collar. I was skeptical about forging a bone-style shape, however, it came out amazingly well. And if you don't have fullering dies on a power hammer, just use the horn of an anvil and a crossbeam hammer. If you don't have an anvil, just use 2 crossbeam hammers.
An adorable name tag for an adorable dog. It only makes sense. Next up, we've only got 2 left, so I'm gonna choose this one.
Alright, 4th present. This one's pretty simple, but I wanted to make a sewing needle. The person I'm making this for really likes sewing, so it feels like an obvious choice. However, because I can't make anything at a normal scale, I'm going to make it really big. Firstly, I flatten a section of my round bar just a little bit so that I have a stable surface to punch a hole through. Then I, punch the hole through, and drift it open just a little bit. From there, I draw down the shank of the needle under the power hammer and clean it up with hand hammers. Once I have a needle-looking shape, I flatten out the hole that I punched to make it an oval shape like the eye of a needle. However, once I have it in the correct shape, I noticed that where I had punched the eye was significantly flatter than the shank, so I went back and drew down the shank some more so that it wouldn't be any wider than the eye of the needle. And now that I have it in a proper needle shape, I cut off the butt that I was holding with my tongs, clean up the end, give it a hit with the needle scaler, because of course I did, hit it with the wire wheel, and you've got yourself a big old needle. This actually does have some practical use, I'm certain. It feels like a marlin spike, and I made the tip really dull, so if she wants to use it for something like that, she could. And she loves to crochet, so I'm certain she can use it for some kind of something.
I'm a simple man. I've always liked things that are way bigger than they should be or way smaller than they should be. I don't know why, I just think they're cute. And speaking of which, we're moving on to our final present right here.
Alright, 5th gift. This person actually requested something. They asked for something pretty to hang in their windows. And they love the big nails that I make, and they love the number 3. So I decided I would link 3 of my big nails together in a chain. Now, if you're watching this video, you have more than likely seen my short on big nails, but just to give you a refresher, after the power hammer, I had cleaned them up with my hand hammer, and then I sledged them into the hardy hole of my anvil. I start with 6 inches of 1-inch square stock. They end up being 11 inches long and weighing almost 2 pounds. Once I had myself a nail, I put the bottom fullering die onto my power hammer and smashed in some fullers. And I can honestly say it's easier to just have 2 flat dies and a round bar to make your fullers. I've done it both ways on these nails, so I can say that the 2 flat dies with a round bar is better. Once I had my fullers in, I bent the nail and hooked it up with the other 2. As for finishing, can you guess what I did first? And then I went straight from that to finishing it with boiled linseed oil. I did consider linking them up in a loop, however, there's only 3 and it just kind of looks like a messy tangle. The aesthetics of them hanging is far better.
Well folks, those were all the gifts that I forged this year. And if you're curious about this, this was a present from last year. Oh no. This was a present from last year and it is supposed to be a Christmas tree. I don't know if that really comes across, but I think with the star it kind of sells it. I mostly made this video for the people who got my presents so that they can watch and see how I made them. Plus, I wanted to give you guys some ideas. So I'm obviously publishing this after Christmas because I would hate to spoil the surprise of what these people were getting if they saw it in the video. But I hope I gave you guys some inspiration for next year, and I hope you enjoyed. And I hope everyone who gets a present enjoys it. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh boy. I somehow forgot to say like the most important thing in this video, which is Merry Christmas.